They thought calling 911 would force me to work for free. What the dispatcher told them ended their power trip instantly. It started with one of those winter storms that feels less like weather and more like a personal attack. Snow had been falling nonstop since late evening, thick heavy flakes piling up faster than anyone expected. By morning, the entire neighborhood was buried. Cars were half swallowed. Sidewalks were invisible. And the HOA parking lot looked more like an abandoned ice rink than a place people could actually use. The wind howled through the buildings, pushing snow back into any space that had been cleared the night before. It was the kind of storm where even stepping outside felt like a bad decision. I woke up early, already knowing what the day was going to bring. This wasn't my first winter with a plow truck. An experience had taught me one thing very clearly. When snow hits hard, people suddenly remember who owns heavy equipment. Before I even finished my coffee, my phone was buzzing with alerts, group messages, missed calls, and neighborhood chatter complaining about blocked exits and trapped vehicles. Everyone was frustrated, cold, and desperate to get moving. Outside, the scene was pure chaos. Residents were shoveling furiously, some giving up halfway through and just standing there staring at the mess. Tires spun uselessly as people tried to escape parking spots they never should be parked in overnight. The HOA lot, in particular, was completely impassable. Snowbanks had formed solid walls at the entrances, and the plow service they usually hired clearly hadn't shown up yet. Tension hung in the air, thick as the snow itself. I focused on clearing my own driveway first, not out of spite, just common sense. I had places to be later, and I wasn't about to trap myself for the sake of other people's poor planning. As my plow cut clean lines through the snow, I could feel eyes on me. You could almost hear the unspoken assumption forming. Since I had the equipment, I'd obviously take care of everything else too. That assumption would turn out to be the spark that set the entire situation on fire. It didn't take long before that unspoken assumption turned into a direct confrontation. As soon as I shut off my truck, a small group from the HOA came marching over, their boots crunching loudly against the packed snow. At the front was the HOA president, clipboard tucked under one arm, wearing the kind of expression that said this wasn't going to be a request, it was going to be a demand. Without even a greeting, they pointed toward the parking lot and told me it needed to be plowed immediately. I stayed calm and asked a simple question. Who authorized the work? And what was the payment arrangement? That asked when their tone shifted. The president laughed, as if money wasn't even part of the conversation, and said this was for the good of the community. According to them, owning a plow meant I had a responsibility to help, especially during a storm like this. There was no contract, no agreement, and certainly no discussion beforehand. They just assumed my time, fuel, and equipment were theirs to command. When I explained that I don't plow commercially without a written agreement and upfront payment, the mood turned icy fast. One of the board members accused me of being selfish. Another said I was holding the neighborhood hostage. The most ridiculous claim was that refusing to plow could be considered negligence during an emergency. They spoke over me, acting like saying something confidently made it true. The entitlement was unreal. I reminded them that they already had a contracted snow removal service and that their failure to schedule or confirm that service wasn't my problem. That answer didn't go over well. The HOA president snapped back that their contractor was running late, and that I should just step in until they arrived. No offer to pay extra. No apology. Just expectation. That's when I made my position crystal clear. I told them no politely, firmly, and without raising my voice. I wasn't going to burn fuel, risk damage to my equipment, or take on liability for free because they mismanaged their responsibilities. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then came the threats. They warned me there would be consequences, fines, and official action. I didn't argue. I simply went back to my truck, unaware that their next move would be far more unhinged than anything they'd said so far. I hadn't even made it back inside the house when the mood of the entire neighborhood shifted again. At first, it was just distant sirens cutting through the wind. The kind you barely notice during a storm because emergency vehicles are always moving around in weather like this. But the sound didn't fade. It got louder, closer. Then I realized the flashing lights were stopping right near the HOA parking lot. Neighbors started peeking out from behind curtains and doors. People who had been shoveling suddenly paused, leaning on their handles, watching as a police cruiser pulled in. Snow swirled around the tires as the officers stepped out. Radios crackling. That's when someone muttered the words that didn't make sense at all. They called 911. I honestly thought it was a joke at first. Who calls emergency services because someone refuses unpaid labor? But it became painfully clear that the HOA had actually dialed 911 and reported the situation as an ongoing emergency. From what I later learned, they claimed I was deliberately refusing to help during a snow crisis and that residents were being put at risk because the parking lot wasn't plowed. They framed it like I was obstructing access rather than simply minding my own property. An officer approached me and asked what was going on. I explained everything calmly: how I owned the plow, how there was no agreement, and how I had already declined politely. Meanwhile, the HOA president stood off to the side, arms crossed, clearly expecting the police to pressure me into compliance. You could almost see the confidence on their face, like they truly believed the law was on their side. What made the situation even more absurd was the fact that this wasn't an emergency at all. No one was injured. No one was trapped. Cars were inconveniently stuck, not endangered. The officers quickly picked up on that. One of them stepped away to speak directly with the dispatcher, relaying the details of the call. As word spread that the HOA had tied up emergency lines over a parking lot dispute, the energy shifted fast. Neighbors who had been frustrated with the snow started looking irritated for a different reason. Calling 911 wasn't just dramatic, it was reckless. And that single decision would end up backfiring on the HOA in a way they clearly never anticipated. The real turning point didn't come from the police lights or the growing crowd of onlookers. It came from a voice on the other end of a radio. Calm, direct, and completely unimpressed. The dispatcher, having now heard the full story, made it very clear that this call never should have come through emergency services in the first place. Her tone wasn't angry, but it carried the kind of authority that shuts down nonsense immediately. She explained that refusing to perform unpaid work is not a crime, not a violation, and certainly not an emergency. Owning equipment does not obligate someone to use it for others. And no individual or organization has the legal right to demand free labor simply because conditions are inconvenient. The officers relayed her words almost verbatim, and you could see the realization hit the HOA board members in real time. Then came the part that really shifted the balance. The dispatcher pointed out that misusing 911 for non-emergencies is a serious issue. Emergency lines are reserved for situations involving immediate danger to life, health, or property. A snow-covered parking lot, while frustrating, does not qualify. She reminded them that unnecessary calls can delay help for people who truly need it, and that repeated misuse can result in warnings, fines, or even charges depending on local regulations. The HOA president's posture changed instantly. The confidence they had moments earlier drained away. Their arms uncrossed, their voice softened. Suddenly, no one was talking about community responsibility or emergency obligations anymore. The entire narrative collapsed under the weight of a very simple truth. They had overplayed their hand. One of the officers turned back to me and confirmed that I was under no obligation to do anything further. I was free to go about my day. No report against me. No warning. No consequences. The dispatcher's clarity had cut straight through the manufactured drama. Around us, neighbors exchanged looks. Some shook their heads. Others openly scoffed at the HOA's decision. What started as an attempt to intimidate me had turned into a public embarrassment. And standing there in the falling snow, it was obvious that the HOA's authority only existed as long as people believed in it. That belief had just taken a serious hit. Once the officers left and the flashing lights disappeared into the snowy distance, the aftermath settled in quickly. The HOA board didn't have anything left to say. No more threats. No more demands. They quietly retreated, phones already in hand. scrambling to fix the mess they had created for themselves. The parking lot was still buried. Residents were still stuck. And now the HOA had burned every ounce of goodwill they had in the process. Within an hour, an emergency snow removal company finally arrived. Not the usual contractor, but a last-minute service charging premium rates for storm day work. Large industrial plows roared into the lot, scraping and grinding through packed snow while an invoice quietly grew by the minute. People later found out the cost was nearly 3 times what the HOA normally paid. All because of poor planning and a refusal to respect boundaries. That bill didn't magically disappear, it went straight back to the residents in the form of special assessments and increased fees. From my driveway, I watched the whole thing unfold while warming up with a fresh cup of coffee. My truck sat parked, plow clean, engine off. I had done exactly what I was responsible for and nothing more. A few neighbors waved or gave subtle nods of approval as they passed by. Some even apologized on behalf of the HOA, admitting the situation never should be gone that far. The tone around the neighborhood had shifted permanently. In the days that followed, the story spread. People talked about how close the HOA came to real consequences for abusing emergency services. Meetings grew tense. Questions were asked. Trust eroded. The board had wanted to flex authority, but instead they exposed how fragile that authority actually was when challenged. The irony was hard to ignore. All of this could have been avoided with a simple, respectful request and fair compensation. Instead, entitlement led to embarrassment, unnecessary expense, and a public lesson in limits. As for me, I didn't gloat or say, "I told you so." I didn't need to. The outcome spoke for itself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't action, it's letting people face the consequences of their own choices. If you enjoy watching entitled HOAs get shut down the right way, subscribe now because these stories just keep getting crazier.